your presentation. Questions, folks will use the Q&A function in Zoom, and then I'll keep track of that. And so after your presentation, I can, I'll read the questions aloud for you to answer and for everybody to hear.
Okay, sounds great.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and start webinar. Good morning, everybody. We're just gonna wait a minute or two to let folks log on and get settled, and then we'll get started with our presentation. Good morning. If you're just joining us, we're just going to wait another minute or so to let folks log on, and then we'll get started. Thanks for being here. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us, everyone. My name's Alex Tarantino. I am the Preservation Delaware Education Committee Chair. Happy you all are here today, and thanks so much to John, our speaker this morning. I want to give a big thanks to our 2023 conference sponsors for their support. And then just a couple of Zoom instructions for our attendees. Everybody is automatically muted using this webinar format. So if you have questions for John about his presentation, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then after the presentation, we'll do our question and answer session. You can also use the chat box to get in touch with me if you're having technical difficulties or any other issues. And we're going to be recording this webinar as we do with all of our conference virtual sessions. So we'll have those available after the conference on our website and our YouTube channel if you'd like to share it with others. And then lastly, if you aren't already a member of Preservation Delaware, we hope you'll consider joining us. Our member support helps keep events like this one free. So we'll post more info in the chat for you all about Preservation Delaware and about our event tonight. I want to remind everybody we're doing an in-person gathering at Painted Stave. So if you haven't already registered, I hope you will check it out and hopefully join us. So I'm going to introduce our speaker for this morning, John Medkeff. So John's a native and resident of the city of Wilmington. He's been researching, writing, and speaking on the topic of Delaware beer and brewing history for more than 25 years. As Delaware's foremost expert on state brewing history, his articles have been featured in several local and national publications and on radio and television. John has conducted numerous lectures throughout Delaware on a variety of topics related to the state's beer and brewing history and led tours of historic brewing sites. In addition to authoring Brewing in Delaware, a pictorial history of brewing in the first state, he also maintains a website and a Facebook group page dedicated to Delaware's brewing history. John has led projects to promote and preserve the state's brewing heritage, including the completion of the Christian Crouch Memorial and Restore the King, the campaign to restore Delaware's historic King Gambrinus statue. In his professional life, John works as a marketing manager for a Wilmington business services company. Welcome, John. Thanks so much for being here today.
Alex, thank you so much for the nice introduction, and thanks to everyone for joining and to Preservation Delaware for the invitation. Many years ago, I was informed by fairly reliable sources that Delaware's iconic King Gambrinus statue was broken and unfortunately sent to the scrap heap. And as I later discovered, though, Only part of that story turned out to be true. Shortly, I'll get to the story of how I came into possession of the sculpture and why it's worth saving. In 2016, I helped found a nonprofit organization called the Friends of Delaware's Gambrinus statue to raise funds needed to repair the statue and eventually return it to public display. The sculpture's been out of the public's eye now for more than half a century. In 2017, the Friends of Gambrinus began its Restore the King fundraising campaign. So, do public sculptures still matter? And if so, why are they worth preserving? Well, for one, statues engage audiences in a natural setting outside of the more formal settings of galleries and museums. And they play an important role in shaping our collective memory. Public sculptures also serve as tangible reminders of our history and help preserve our cultural heritage for future generations. And they have the power to inspire us and remind us of our shared humanity and the values that bind us together as a society. Now, our project is a statue, an 11-foot tall, 1-ton zinc sculpture of Gambrinus, the legendary European king of beer. From 1882 until 1962, the king was a fixture on the front of Wilmington's Diamond State Brewery, where it was perched 3 stories above the ground, affixed to the front of the brewery brew house. The statue is the most significant remaining artifact from Delaware's golden age of brewing in the late 19th through the early 20th century, when the industry was one of the state's largest and most profitable. And of course, today, the state has nearly 40 breweries, and with one, it's opening just about every other month or so. And beer is once again an important commodity to the state. And our group sees our restoration project as the perfect symbol for the return of brewing as an important cultural, economic, and social driver in Delaware. Now, going back in time, as I mentioned earlier, Delaware had a thriving brewing industry from the post-Civil War era until Prohibition, which put an end to the industry altogether. The breweries and their affiliated businesses like saloons, restaurants, package stores, and bottling houses accounted for millions of dollars in business and hundreds of jobs throughout the state. By 1900, brewing was the 6th largest industry in Delaware. And the breweries themselves were located mainly in the state's population center, Wilmington. There were a few smaller breweries around the state, but none could really compete with the 3 large breweries that dominated the entire state and, in fact, the region around Delaware. The state's longest running and largest and best known brewery was the Diamond State Brewery, which was located at 5th and Adams Streets. In 1872, German immigrant Joseph Stokel took control of an existing modestly sized brewery that had stood at the site of 5th and Adams since about 1860. That original brewery was made mostly of frame and stone, and during the brewing process, the use of fire and frame tend not to go too well together. And unfortunately, in December of 1881, Stokel's brewery burned to the ground. It was a complete loss. He was a keen businessman and had the foresight to purchase fire insurance and collected in on that insurance, and the next year in 1882, constructed this enormous cathedral to brewing on the site of the original brewery along 5th Street between Adams and Jackson Streets. This impressive structure was adorned with a large statue of King Gambrinus, 3 stories above the brewhouse building. The legend of the Germanic king Gambrinus stretches back for centuries. In fact, the earliest known reference was ascribed to Roman historian Tacitus in about 98 CE. Now, over the centuries, the name Gambrinus became associated with the brewing of beer, and there were many myths and legends that surrounded this legendary king. By the mid-19th century, brewers across the European continent adopted the king as a symbol of their trade, and it's perhaps one of the earliest examples of a figure being utilized for commercial promotion. The brewers decorated their facilities with Gambrinus artwork and sculptures. And during the period, steins, coins, and other items from the era featured the king of beer, Gambrinus. And to this day, if you travel across Europe, you can see the lasting influence of Gambrinus in sculptures and statues all over the continent. In fact, public sculptures of the king can be found in just about every European country. In the mid to late 19th century, when many German brewers immigrated to the US, they brought naturally with them their familiar customs, including their affection for King Gambrinus. And when the brewers had accumulated enough wealth to construct their own breweries, many decorated them with the king of beer. From the 1870 through the turn of the century, new breweries were popping up all over America, and there were hundreds of them, hundreds of new facilities to support this ever-increasing and always growing industry. The production of Gambrinus figures was also at its peak during that era, with several companies involved in the business. Perhaps the most prolific of the Gambrinus statue sellers was the J.W. Fisk Company of Manhattan. They offered a Gambrinus sculpture in two different sizes, one a 3.5 foot version and a much larger 10.5 foot variation for use outdoors. The large Fisk Gambrinus is believed to have been the largest zinc trade statue ever made in America. And in fact, that is the one that Joseph Stockel selected for use at his brewery. Now, Fisk sold, but they didn't actually produce the statues. Instead, they subcontracted the zinc casting to at least 3 foundries in Brooklyn, Seelig, Stoll, and Gabelt. The slug plate on the base of our statue, which is pictured here, identifies Michael Gabelt and Brothers as the producer of the Stockel statue. Now, Fisk owned the design and the molds and merely subcontracted this work. Through our research, we've discovered at least a dozen Fisk Gambrinus statues. All of those identified to date were located on East Coast breweries, as far north as Rhode Island and as far south as Maryland. And here are examples of Gambrinus statues in New York and in Cranston, Rhode Island. And here are a few more examples closer by in New Jersey and in Maryland. And of course, our statue from the Diamond State Brewery in Wilmington. The Stockel family's ownership of the Diamond State Brewery didn't last beyond Prohibition. The eldest Stockel heir, Harry Stockel, who was actively involved in the brewery from the 1890s up until Prohibition, died during the 1920s, and the remaining Stockel heirs had no interest in continuing the brewery, and in fact, it was illegal to do so from 1920 to 1933. In the early 1930s, after repeal, the family sold the facility to a stock company appropriately named the Diamond State Brewery Incorporated. The new company revived the Stockel brand and the popular King Gambrinus imagery for some of its products. In Diamond State, the new Diamond State did fairly well through the 1930s and even survived the difficult war years in fairly good standing despite material rationing during the war. Unfortunately, the brewing industry began to consolidate in the 1950s, and smaller players like Diamond State had an increasingly difficult time competing with larger, better funded national and regional companies. And by 1954, Diamond State declared bankruptcy, and it was the last of Delaware's big breweries to close, and it closed for good. By 1956, the Diamond State Brewery was sold, and 2 days after the sale was completed, coincidentally, or perhaps not so, King Gambrinus dropped his goblet and the right arm that was attached to it down to the street 30 feet below him. In fact, we've documented the same thing happening with a couple of other of the Fisk statues. Fortunately, no one was hurt in any of these accidents. It was really poor design to not have reinforced the sculpture's heavy arm. It was just welded onto the statue. It became apparent in the mid-1950s that the Diamond State Brewery was in the direct path of the planned Adams-Jackson Expressway through the city of Wilmington. And you can see here that the brewery was one of the last buildings to be cleared out through the corridor to make way for Interstate 95. In 1962, before demolition of the brewery complex, the owners of the building, the Cohen Brothers Furniture Company, removed the King from the brewery. They displayed the King in their Madison Street furniture store for a few weeks, but Mr. Cohen had bigger plans to restore the sculpture and place it in a museum somewhere in Delaware. And that plan, unfortunately, was never hatched. Instead, Cohen sold the statue to a suburban Wilmington restaurateur. And in 1963, Francis Corridori opened his King's Inn along Naaman's Road, with the Gambrinus statue prominently stationed along the roadway in front of the restaurant. You might recognize this building, still standing. Unfortunately, the King's no longer in front of it. It's now Harry's Savoy Grill. Mr. Corridori affixed a new right arm and goblet, which was created out of some composite material, and that was painted and affixed to the sculpture. Unfortunately, the King's Inn only lasted 7 years, and by the early 1970s, it was out of business, and the statue was removed and sold to Corridori's son, Tom, who placed it in storage. And there were reports of Gambrinus showing up at backyard parties and other locations through the 1970s around Newcastle County. In 1978, Corridori was just seeking to sell the statue, and he moved it to a junkyard on Airport Road near Newcastle. And that year, while it was being moved, the statue was dropped on its back, and unfortunately, it was dashed to some 60-odd pieces. And here's a present condition of the statue. The pieces were recovered and eventually sold to a Wilmington collector by the name of Rob Howard. Rob had the idea of someday putting all the pieces of the King back together, but unfortunately never got around to it. After he passed away, his estate conveyed the ownership of the statue to me, and that's when our project got started. The Delaware Gambrinus statue is one of 5 known Fisk statues to have survived out of at least a dozen that were produced. One is displayed outdoors at a brewery, the Samuel Adams Brewery in Branginsville, Pennsylvania, near Allentown. 3 others are in history museums, one at the Maryland Center for History and Culture in Baltimore, another at the Onondaga Historical Museum in Syracuse, New York, and the final one, which was originally in Cranston, Rhode Island at the Narragansett Brewery, is now displayed at the Modella Museum of Science and Industry in Toluca, Mexico. When I obtained pieces of the statue, I consulted with Carol Grissom, the Smithsonian's preeminent expert on zinc statuary. She had worked on a restoration project for the Maryland Historical Society statue a few years earlier and was intimately familiar with the design. And here's an image of the statue being hoisted into its location at the Maryland Historical Museum. Carol confirmed that our statue could indeed be repaired, and she provided me with references of companies who could do the work. I reached out to them and received preliminary estimates in the neighborhood of between $75,000 and $100,000 to properly restore our statue. The Friends of Delaware's Gambrinus statue raises funds through direct public appeals and serves as a benefactor for events throughout the state of Delaware. To date, we've raised approximately 30% of our initial $100,000 campaign goal through events and direct fundraising. So in order to best tackle our project, we segmented the work into 8 phases. In 2018, a volunteer museum professional helped us catalog and performed a condition assessment of our pieces as part of phase 1. In phase 2, we hired a professional scanning firm to perform non-destructive laser scanning of the statue at the Allentown brewery, Samuel Adams Brewery up in Allentown. Incidentally, this particular statue was created from the exact mold as our statue at the Gebelt Foundry. The firm who did the scanning also created a 3D model of the entire sculpture, which gives us a complete baseline for comparative purposes and will help us with the eventual recreation of our statue's missing pieces. For phase 3 in 2022, we partnered with the Winterthur University of Delaware Art Conservation Program. A fellow in the program performed 3D laser scanning on all of our parts, statue's extant pieces, all 60 or so pieces, and followed up with a piecing together a 3D model of all of our statue's parts. And this helps us better visualize the pieces that will eventually need to be recreated and serves as a good comparison for our complete 3D model that we had developed earlier. Once we raise the remaining funds and complete all of the restoration work, the sculpture will be painted in the original color scheme of the Stoeckel statue. We intend to donate the restored statue to the Delaware Historical Society for preservation and long-term conservation. That was the original goal of Mr. Cohen back in the early 1960s, and we hope to see that to fruition. Coincidentally, the Society's Delaware History Museum is exactly 9 blocks to the spot east of Gambrinus's original location at the Diamond State Brewery at 5th and Adams. But we think the King Gambrinus sculpture can serve as a museum touchstone for history presentations on topics as varied as immigration, industrial history, the Gilded Age, Prohibition, and counter-urbanization. Of course, we have a website, restoretheking.com, where the public can learn more about our project and support our cause. Our group is actively seeking assistance from anyone who has the skills to lend, whether it be help with fundraising, grant writing, event planning, or web and graphic design. Guaranteed we'll find a role for you if you want to help us out. So please reach out to us, and we encourage you to do so at info@restoretheking.com or via our website, restoretheking.com. We'd love for you to join us. And with that, I'd like to thank Preservation Delaware for the opportunity to present. We're honored to be included in today's conference. And thank you all so much for listening. And I'm happy to answer any questions about our project.
Awesome. Thank you, John. That was so cool. Love the photos. I did. So let's see. So I put a link to the website in the chat. And
Great.
then I also put the email you mentioned. So info@restoretheking.com in the chat. So folks, you're able to access that. Please go check it out. I'm really excited to learn more. So let's see, we do have, and John, if you think of anything else you want to share, feel free to pop it in the chat, or I can do it if you let me know.
Will do.
So let's see our question. So, here's a fun one. Okay. What is your favorite local brew?
Oh gosh, wow. That's putting me on the spot. I don't have a favorite. There are so many. We're pretty blessed to have so many great craft beverage companies producing great products, all the way from Claymont all the way down to Delmar. And we'll be sampling some this evening at Painted Stave, won't we?
Yes, that would be awesome. So, okay, so how about this? Can we do a Newcastle, a Kent, and a Sussex? Like, I don't know, what's a brewery like, or a beer that comes like first thing that comes to your mind? Let's do that. Doesn't have to be favorite. Just what do you think? Newcastle County brewery or beer?
What do I think? Or
Like first thing that comes to mind. Doesn't have we don't have to say it's your favorite, but where's
oh
some place that somebody should check out or a beer they should try?
Oh, well, I'm going to go outside the beer realm here,
Okay.
and I'm going to go with Liquid Alchemy. They're a producer of mead and cider, and they have a particular affection for history. And in fact, are going to be partnering with the American Swedish Historical Society next month on a beverage. I believe it's this. I want to say it's the 11th or 17th of next month. They're doing a collaborative beverage and an event at their location in Wilmington. So they're fun. Check them out for sure.
That's
For
awesome.
Kent County, well, unfortunately, we have a closure, recent closure with departure of Blue Earl, and Fordham and Dominion are also going to be leaving the area. So Kent County's a bit in a bit of a bind now, but of course we're going to be at Painted Stave this evening, so I can recommend Painted Stave. Brickworks is a great brewery and restaurant in the Smyrna area. For Sussex County, gosh, there are just so many. But I guess, the granddaddy of them all is, of course, Dogfish Head with their complex in Milton, and then their restaurants and breweries over in Rehoboth.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, no, I would say if you haven't checked it out, gotta go. I'm always surprised at how many. I mean, Delaware, we're such a small state, but it seems like it's booming now. I mean, there's so many local breweries and yeah, craft spirits and things like that. It's awesome.
And it's fantastic that the state is taking notice and they have their own beer, wine, and ale trail
Yes.
to acknowledge the significance of beer tourism and craft beverage tourism, really, to the state. It is as I mentioned, it is a significant social and cultural and economic driver, and the state acknowledges its importance.
Absolutely. All right, so let's see. Our next question, is there any Delaware beer history ephemera you'd like to find from your research?
I think I found the ultimate with King Gambrinus. It's remarkable. There's Breweriana, Delaware Breweriana, in the last, I don't know, 5-6 years, has increased in value. So if you find anything in the 1950s, 40s, 30s, or pre-prohibition, any pieces of ephemera or trays or bottles, the value has increased dramatically in the last few years. It's really remarkable. And because Delaware's breweries were so small and produced such small quantities of items out there, they're highly valuable.
Wow. Oh, wow. That's crazy. Yeah, I had no idea. That makes sense, though. Okay, so let's see. Oh, How many King Gambrinus statues have you seen in person?
I have only seen in person two, not
Okay.
including ours, of course, in pieces, but um, I visited the one in Maryland at the Baltimore Historical Society, and of course the one we scanned in Allentown. And I've got to say, seeing it in person it's rather breathtaking. The enormity of the sculpture, how big it is, and how grand it is. Really, when you're standing in front of it, you get an appreciation for what it must have been like for someone to see this on the front of these structures back in the day.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Is there one, I guess, is there with the statues that still exist, is there one that like you'd like to go visit?
Yeah, I'd like to get to the other two. The one that's in Syracuse. I've been close, but haven't quite made it up there. But I plan to do so in the short term. And the one in Toluca, Mexico. That one has an interesting history. It was sold to a private dealer when Narragansett closed. A Mexican dealer. He displayed it apparently in his front yard for a number of years before selling it to Modelo, and they placed it indoors at their brewery. So they saved it, but it has its origins back in Rhode Island. In
That
fact, the Allentown statue has its origins in Rochester, New York. It was the brewery that existed in New York was purchased as part of the consolidation that I talked about in the 1950s and 60s. It was purchased by the Schaefer Brewing Company, a familiar name to many of us. And Schaefer opened a new plant in Allentown and closed the plant up in Rochester and shipped the statue down to Allentown. So that's how it got there. And there was a succession of owners since the 1970s. It's now owned by the Samuel Adams Brewery. It's not in the public view. It's behind a gate, so you can't see it, and the public can't see it. But it is in the brewery courtyard.
okay. Well, Mexico sounds like it would be that'd be a good excuse for a trip down there, right?
It does indeed. Sounds like a great trip.
We've got somebody asking if you are going to be at our event this evening, either on the walking tour at Painted Stave, and I think you mentioned that you will be.
I will be. I'll be at the Painted Stave. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you've got maybe some folks who are looking to meet you.
Fantastic.
And then let's see our next question. What is your favorite Delaware beer history tidbit that you didn't get a chance to mention during your presentation?
Oh gosh, there were so many um, highlights. So Delaware, the Delaware region, the Delaware Valley region in particular, but Wilmington was one of the first places in the country that beer was brewed commercially. The Swedes started the production of beer not too long after the Dutch did up in New York, and it was one of the first commodities produced in New Sweden. The other point I would add is that lager beer, which was introduced to America in the 1840s, was introduced to Delaware and Wilmington in 1850, so not long after. And it was one of the first places that lager beer was produced in the United States.
That's awesome. So we are the first state in not one, but a couple of things.
A couple of things. We're pretty close. We maybe not the first, but pretty darn
Close.
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 We were right there.
That's awesome.
I guess the point is we have a long the breadth of brewing history in Delaware is as deep as anywhere. Obviously, given our size, our small size, we don't have the depth, but we indeed have the breadth.
Yeah, absolutely. What beer memorabilia do you personally own?
Oh gosh, I'm looking at above my desk a 4x3 metal tray of the Joseph Stockel Brewing Company. That's circa 1910, and before the introduction of vehicles. So I would say maybe even earlier than 1910, maybe about 1905. A beautiful factory scene that I showed earlier in this presentation. That's probably my prized possession.
Awesome. And I guess where do you find a lot of this memorabilia? Is it like online or?
Well, back in the when I was I'm not an avid collector. I can't afford to be in that business at this point. As I mentioned, it's extremely expensive to get involved in that, and that's not really my interest anyway. I collected in the 90s and early 2000s,
Yeah.
just for the history of it, and to gain a better understanding of the history. These days, it's very difficult. I mean, you can find stuff online, but you're going to pay through the nose for anything that you find.
Right.
Occasionally, you might discover something in an online auction, or maybe even in an antique store or a garage sale, but it's getting hard to find that stuff these days.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Let's see. Did Gambrinus feature in any local German ethnic or city celebrations or parades in Wilmington's past?
Yes, that's an excellent question. Indeed, the precursor to the Delaware Sangerbund's Oktoberfest, the Volkfest, in the 1870s and 1880s, had a procession to start the festival. And Gambrinus was often part of that. Someone clothed as Gambrinus would ride along in one of the brewery's beer wagons. And so the symbolism was very clear. Obviously, the German culture having introduced Gambrinus, the concept to America, that was a common occurrence as part of these celebrations. And in fact, I've seen an image of the Syracuse statue that is in a parade. I'm not sure how they lug that thing around. You can imagine a 11-foot, 1-ton, very fragile statue. It's being paraded through the streets of Syracuse, probably in about the 1930s after Prohibition.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's way easier to have somebody dress up instead of lugging
That's
this.
right. Yeah, the imagery of Gambrinus kind of faded a bit with Prohibition. And of course, German culture became more assimilated, particularly after World War I, leading into World War II. And so there wasn't as distinct an identity with German life and folk ways. And the Gambrinus legend, I guess, sort of suffered a bit during that era. And it was revived, as I mentioned, by the Diamond State Brewery as part of a nostalgic way, look at the past as part of their packaging and branding. But it lost most of its symbolism through that era, I think, other than being a nostalgic look at a familiar brand of the past in Delaware. And these days, you'll see Gambrinus pop up in brewery imaging and packaging, not as frequent as in the 2 centuries prior.
Right. So thinking about sort of pulling on that string, are you aware of any historic recipes that are still in use? I guess beer recipes, maybe either Diamond State Brewery recipes, or are you aware of other breweries that are trying to incorporate kind of historic recipes into their current brews?
Yes, that's a really good question. I'm not aware of any historic recipes in Delaware that survived. All of the breweries, the recipes that of the breweries that were around in Delaware, the recipes were destroyed when the breweries went out of business. The Stokel recipes don't survive. I've talked with family members, and they're not aware of any of those recipes surviving, unfortunately. There was an attempt by now former Blue Arrow Brewing Company to revive the Diamond State brand. And they did that briefly a couple of years ago. And it was one of their flagship beers. They produced a pre-prohibition lager beer in the spirit of the Stockel brand. And in fact, the label for the can was the old Diamond State label. So that was a kind of neat look back. And then also Wilmington Brew Works features our King Gambrinus on one of their labels for a beer called Crouch's Creation, which pays homage to the original lager beer brewer Christian Crouch, who brought lager beer and lager yeast from Philadelphia to Wilmington in 1850. But again, that's a recreation of a beer, not based on an actual recipe, but at least it acknowledges Delaware's brewing past and features our statue as well. So we're proud of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I actually was wondering that myself, if you all had been able to partner with local breweries to try to incorporate, either Gambrinus, the imagery, or, something related to kind of the history. So it sounds like you have.
We have indeed. The brewers, and I'll even extend that out, the craft beverage producers, the distillers, the meaderies, the cideries, the wineries have all been extremely supportive of what we do and have been as gracious as possible in helping us with events and donating their products to help with those events, and have really supported us from the start. And we're excited. We see our project as being a tribute to them and what they're doing in reviving this important industry for our state.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think, well, I have a question of my own, but I want to invite our audience members, if you have any other questions, pop them into the Q&A. If, while we're talking, you think of something, please pop it in the Q&A. We have a little bit more time. But kind of in that vein, honoring sort of, this tradition that now different folks are reviving. I think it's really interesting. And I think you mentioned it when you were talking about with the Delaware Historical Society, and the intent is for them to take over, to have the statue, house it there, and how, I guess brewing history has so many different, it's not just about brewing, right? It can be about, like immigration and different cultures and, like social history, all of these different things. And, I don't know that on the surface, that's something that I myself would have thought about, right? Like, but it makes total sense. So there's so much to be learned from that. And just as a tradition that like has been, for how many years, right? And even I guess around the world, even longer, right? Forever, folks have been brewing something. So it is really cool to think about our modern day craft, beverage producers, and kind of continuing on this tradition, of something that's been going on forever, like I said. But sorry, all that to say, have you all thought about maybe developing like an exhibit to go along with the statue at the Delaware Historical Society, to kind of, to explain some of those themes and things that, folks who could come and visit, maybe wouldn't think about, but could learn more?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Now, again, you may make a good point, Alex. This is an 11-foot, 1-ton statue. So when it's installed, it's not moving. And so given that idea, it's important that it be able to serve as a touchstone for a lot of different discussions and concepts that the museum might have. So yes, we've thought a bit about how it might be displayed, and the Delaware Historical Society owns busts of both Joseph and his wife Johanna Stockel, who both served as presidents of the brewing company at one time or another. Those busts were in their mausoleum at Riverview Cemetery, which unfortunately was broken into at one point, and then the family removed the bust and donated them to the Delaware Historical Society. So we thought this would be a great pairing with our statue. along with an interactive display and explanation of who Gambrinus was, what the significance of the statue is, what role the Diamond State Brewery played in Wilmington's social and economic development, and that sort of concept. So yeah, that's our idea. We've thought a bit about it and have worked with the Historical Society. You know, we have a long range plan for restoring this. We understood it wasn't going to happen overnight, and so that's our concept. That's what we hope to achieve in the end.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to see yeah the fruits of your efforts. Guess I'll say if I think that's all the questions I'm seeing. Let me check the chat. We have comments in the chat just saying nice job. Everybody loved your presentation. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the group here? Like I said earlier in the chat, if you go in there before we finish here, check out those links, the links to the Restore the King website and the email address, the info email address that John mentioned. Anything else you can think of, John, that you want to mention?
Well, one thing I didn't mention that occurred to me as I was speaking, the process of restoring the statue. So what we plan to do, what we've been told by conservation companies, is that essentially, so we are going to take the existing pieces. There's going to be a skeletal frame built. The existing pieces will go around the skeletal frame, which the original statue did not have. And then from our 3D model, we'll be able to identify and create the pieces that are missing. There'll be a positive mold made, and then a negative mold from that, and then zinc will be poured into the mold to make those pieces, and then everything will be fused together and painted. Okay. So that's kind of the process for what has to happen. It's extremely, as you might imagine, it's extremely laborious to do a project like this, expensive. It would be much easier for us just to recreate the statue from our 3D scan, and we can just do it all together. But that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to preserve a piece of Delaware history.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again for sharing with us. I really enjoyed the presentation. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person tonight, John. So thanks for your time. And so I think that, well, I don't think it does. It wraps our virtual portion of our conference. So I'm going to turn it over to Dee Durham, who's our current Preservation Delaware, to sign us off here and invite you to our event tonight.
Thank you, Alex. John, that was fascinating. And I wanted to give a shout out and a special thanks to Alex and the whole education committee. They're all volunteers. We're all basically volunteers here with Preservation Delaware, and our education committee puts on events throughout the year, culminating in our annual conference, and just it's another amazing conference this year. So thank you, Alex, and everyone on your committee. John, I just wanted to, I loved your presentation, but in one of the early slides, you mentioned the importance of sculpture. And I just wanted to let you and everyone else here know that in Newcastle County, we are moving forward. I've been working with County Executive Matt Meyer and his team to propose a public art commission and a program that will encourage public art at county facilities, and maybe go from there to build additional programs for public art. So it's just really cool to see this, this is a little piece of that and very exciting. So I'll have to share this presentation with everyone that's helping me with that. So anyway, yes, thank you everyone who's hung with us for this through to this morning, and hope everyone will join us tonight. Please do come. We've got lots of food, a taco bar, the distillery, open bar. I think there's maybe even a few slots left on the Smyrna walking tour, historic walking tour. which kicks off at 5 p.m. And then we will start things off at the Painted Stave at 5:30. So if you haven't signed up already, please just come join us, or you can sign up through the Preservation Delaware website, preservationde.org. And thanks again for everyone for joining us. Please let us know if you'd like to get involved in our efforts in our education committee or any of our other committees. We'd love to have you, so reach out. Thanks everyone for joining us for the conference.
Awesome. Thanks, Dee.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.